I'm joined now by Denver 7 political reporter Meghan Lopez. And Meghan, when these mass shootings happen, the conversation, at least politically, does seem to shift towards guns. You were watching things go down at the state capitol yesterday, legislators back to work already talking about guns, but these had already been going through the process before Monday's tragedy.
That's right, Jason. There's two bills that have a broad amount of Democratic support at the state legislature that have already been in the process. One of them requires safe storage of firearms in order to keep those firearms out of the hands of kids, youths, and people that maybe should not have access to guns. The language has kind of changed a little bit, but essentially, if you're found to not have done that, then there's certain penalties that you can face, but they're very minor. That one passed and is heading on to the next chamber. So it still has a little bit in the legislative process to go. The other one that was in a committee yesterday after passing from one chamber to the next is a bill that deals with lost and stolen firearms. And this says that the firearm owner has to report them as lost or stolen within 5 days of discovering that, or they could also face penalties. It was knocked down to a civil penalty. Obviously, there's a lot of back and forth. Both of those bills led to really long discussions that we saw play out on the House and the Senate floor in the state capitol. This was obviously well before that tragedy that we saw in Boulder. These are discussions that have been going on. And because Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion in Colorado, they're very likely to pass. We're also kind of hearing something that we had heard yesterday during some of those really moving speeches on the House and Senate floor was foreshadowing that even more legislation might be on the way.
So that's at the state level. Today, you're kind of pivoting your focus a little bit, including the federal level. There were some meetings, again, scheduled before Monday's tragedy that had happened. What's the latest coming from Washington?
I mean, it's a lot of what you hear anytime that there is a tragedy like this. We heard it on the state level. It's sorrow, it's tears, but then it's, anger and calls for action. And the same kind of talks are happening on the federal level as well. There is a renewed effort to have the Senate take up two bills that passed out of the House, not really with bipartisan support, that deal with background checks. One of them does away with something called the Charleston exemption that essentially says that if you have not gotten your background check completed within 3 days, then that sale can go forward. The other one tightens the rules around universal background checks. It had gotten through the House and it still has not been taken up in the Senate, but we've heard President Joe Biden calling for pretty broad reforms when it comes to gun control, saying that he would sign both of those. Vice President Kamala Harris also is calling for that. As you remember, she visited Colorado not too long ago when she was talking about her American Rescue Plan. So obviously this is something that's happening on a federal level. I spoke with Congressman Jason Crow, and he's really pushing for it too, trying to get his colleagues to at least take up the measure. But something that we saw play out in Senate committees yesterday was just this kind of same thing that we're used to, which is, people who are really pro second rights, like Senator Ted Cruz, saying that these conversations don't need to come up every time that there is a tragedy like what we saw in Atlanta and like what we're experiencing here in Boulder. And on the other side, you have others saying that now is the time, and it's been well past the time, that we really need to consider more strict gun reforms.
Now, a lot of that tends to fall on the ears of people as rhetoric, as, okay, we hear people coming out and giving these speeches and claiming something's going to be done. A lot of our viewers probably just want to know, what is the most likely change that will actually happen, whether that be federal, state, or local? What change is the most likely or the soonest that could come out of all of this?
The biggest thing I would say to pay attention to is what's happening on the state level, simply because the Democrats have that trifecta of control that you heard me talk about. Definitely pay attention to what's happening on the state level.
Denver 7 political reporter Meghan Lopez, all over it. You can watch her full report tonight on Denver 7 News at 6 o'clock.